Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends. A very, very happy World Environment Day to all of you as we are gathered here in this beautiful room in the Environment House 2 here in Geneva. I would like to ask you to extend your minds beyond this room and think about and picture the mountains, the forests, the rivers, the sea, the deserts, the lakes, the ice, the wildlife, because that is what we are celebrating here today, and we should not lose sight of this purpose that brings us here together today, which is to celebrate nature. So let me warmly welcome you again and thank at the outset the Geneva Environment Network for organizing this event. We know Geneva is a hub for global environmental governance, and the Genevans have also established over the years a family feel in the way they bring us together. And so this is a family event where we join, as I have said, together to celebrate World Environment Day. World Environment Day is the UN's biggest day of awareness raising and action for the environment. Millions of people around the world join forces in action and raising their voices on the 5th of June every year. The spotlight of this year's celebration is on land restoration, desertification, and drought resilience under the theme, Our Land, Our Future. We are delighted that the host country for the 2024 edition of the World Environment Day is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the kingdom has really stepped up its actions around protecting our land and our future. The country aims to plant 400 million trees by 2030. It has also increased the number of national parks to more than 400 from 19. And this year, the Kingdom will also host the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification in December 2024 in Riyadh. At the COP, the world will aim towards scaling up global ambition and investment to restore 1.5 billion hectares and degraded lands by 2030. So you may ask, how is this theme relevant for Geneva? As we are looking outside, we can see the mountains, the springs, and well, first of all, I would say that no corner of this planet is immune to environmental challenges, and neither the threats that we face to nature. And furthermore, these threats are increasingly linked to human rights, disasters arising from it, and so many organizations that are here today have an important role to play when we talk about our land, our future. Leading diplomats here in Geneva are, of course, also engaged in the lead up to COP16. And we will also have, of course, this year a unique situation where we have 3 COPs happening: desertification, climate change, and also the biodiversity. Thank you. And this speaks, of course, to the importance of shining a light also on the linkages between all these global challenges. But speaking about land degradation in particular, it affects over 3 billion people, and the triple planetary crisis wreaks havoc on our lands. But nature is resilient, and by restoring nature, we can find back. And countries have already made a number of commitments during the lead up to these important conferences, but we will need to keep the ambition high. As I have said, we approach these 3 COPs this year. There are a lot of good examples that I think we will also discuss during the course of today, where we can draw inspiration from. Let me just mention one such ambition, which is encapsulated by the Great Green Wall Initiative in Africa, which aims to bring life back to degraded lands and improve the livelihoods of millions. While we're still waiting for His Excellency Ambassador Julia Töney, let me also pay tribute to the government of Switzerland for hosting us. We would not be here without the generous support of the government of Switzerland, which of course supports UNEP's work, but also the work of many of the agencies represented here today, and is also a key contributor to the Geneva Environment Network. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, with these few introductory remarks, let me first give the floor to the host country of World Environment Day 2024 and invite His Excellency Mohanad Al-Basrawi, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to say a few words to us. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I thank you for organizing this meeting to raise issues that concern everyone on this planet. Let's work together to compose a new message to raise awareness about the importance of protecting and nurturing the environment in celebration of this year's World Environment Day. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is honored to host the event under the theme Our Land, Our Future. I am grateful to the United Nations Environment Programme for selecting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a host country for this event. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia Vision 2030 prioritizes environmental protection and development. To do this, the country has created a national environment plan, set up special environmental centers, updated environmental systems, expanded protecting areas, and started the ambitious Saudi Green Initiative to plant 10 billion trees in the coming years. Furthermore, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has also introduced the Green Middle East Initiative, aiming to promote regional cooperation and stopping land degradation, protecting plants, hosting biodiversity, ensuring food and water security, adapting the climate change, and improving the quality of life for all. Next December, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will host the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. To the event will be present an opportunity for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to bring about qualitative shift during this important international agreement and enhance international action to reduce land degradation and the effect of drought. In conclusion, we emphasize the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia interest to protecting the environment and its endeavor to enhance international cooperation to confront environmental challenges. And thank you for hearing.
Thank you very much, Excellency, and let me express again our thanks for your leadership in helping to protect our land, our future. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite you to watch two short video remarks. The first one will be of UNEP's Executive Director, Inga Andersen, and the second one will be of Mr. Ibrahim Tiao, the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification.
This World Environment Day, we're asking everyone to join the global movement to restore our lands, to build drought resilience, and to combat desertification. because land degradation and desertification affect over 3 billion people. Freshwater ecosystems are also degraded, making it harder to grow crops and to raise livestock. This disproportionately affects smallholder farmers and, of course, the rural poor. But nature is resilient. By restoring ecosystem, we can slow the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, including desertification, and of course, the crisis of pollution and waste. We can help to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 in line with the global biodiversity framework. And we can get closer to keeping the global temperatures in line with the Paris Agreement by increasing carbon storage, including in the peatlands. And we can reduce poverty and food insecurity in line with the SDGs. Work has begun. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is backing commitments to restore 1 billion hectares of land, an area larger than China. Last year, 6 countries pledged to restore 300,000 kilometers of rivers and 350 million hectares of wetlands. At the 6th United Nations Environment Assembly in February, nations agreed to strengthen sustainable land management. And later this year, the 3 Rio Conventions, the one on climate, the one on biodiversity, and the one on desertification, are each holding a conference of party, or COP, to push further the ambitions of these conventions. Land restorations can be a golden thread that ties together action and ambition across all these 3 important gatherings. So we must make this work count. I thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for hosting World Environment Day 2024. On this important day, I ask everyone to join Generation Restoration. Our land is our future, and we must protect it.
This year's World Environment Day focuses on land restoration, desertification, and drought resilience. It resonates deeply with our shared mission at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Land is the foundation of life. It provides us with food, water, fiber, and the very air we breathe. Yet today, more than ever, land degradation, driven mostly by human activities, is advancing at an alarming rate. From 2015 to 2019, over 100 million hectares of healthy land have been degraded each year, twice the size of Greenland. These statistics highlight the urgent need for action. Escalating land degradation, destabilizing markets, communities, and ecosystems globally. This is not just a professional challenge for me, but also a deeply personal one. In 1972, my home region of the Sahel experienced a devastating drought that marked the beginning of a prolonged and severe crisis.
A vast region of Africa is now a disaster area. It covers 6 countries running along the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. The disaster follows 7 years of little or no rain. This year, there has been the worst drought ever. The disaster covers an area larger than Western Europe. From west to east, it spans over 2,000 miles, greater than the distance from London to Istanbul. At least 6 million people are affected.
The impact on the population was profound. Families, including my own, villages and entire nations suffered immensely. This wasn't just about animals, vegetation, or food. It was about people. When you hear about the millions affected by drought, desertification, famine, or disease, they can seem like distant statistics. But when these tragedies hit close to home, they become a different story. We lost more than just resources. We lost confidence, economies, and livelihoods. Many were forced to migrate, never to return. The devastation has never been fully recovered. However, while land can be degraded, it can also be restored, especially when the degradation has not reached irreparable levels. We have seen many examples worldwide where degraded land has been successfully brought back to productive use. This gives us hope and a clear sense of direction. At the UNCCD, the UN Convention in charge of land and drought, we are championing the cause of land restoration through initiatives such as the Great Green Wall in Africa or the G20 Global Land Restoration Initiative. Through the International Drought Resilience Alliance, we promote resilience to drought. Restoring land and building drought resilience require concerted efforts and innovative solutions. It demands the integration of traditional knowledge with innovative science and technology. It calls for robust policies that promote sustainable land management and active participation of local communities. Above all, it needs a spirit of global solidarity and cooperation. On this World Environment Day, let us pledge to act and secure a thriving legacy for future generations. Generation restoration starts with us and now. Let us all commit to make a difference at the upcoming UNCCD Conference of the Parties, COP16, due for December in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana and team, for sharing these two videos with us, which highlight once again the importance of protecting our land, because through protecting our land, we are protecting our future. But World Environment Day is only one day, right? And both speakers, I think, have highlighted the importance of us committing to action in the future and joining generation restoration. Ambassador Turney, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us for this celebration of World Environment Day. I already told the audience that, of course, we would not be here without the generous support by the government of Switzerland to many of the issues that we discuss here today, to many of the agencies that are present here today. You're also the host organization for not only the Regional Office for Europe of UNEP and many UNEP teams, but also many of the agencies that have come here together today. So let me invite you to say a few words to us. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kreilhuber. Thank you also very much for the kind words that you say for Switzerland. And thanks a lot for this invitation. And a lot of thanks to the organizers of today's celebration. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear and distinguished colleagues and participants, it is for me and for Switzerland also an honor to be here today with you. 2 weeks ago, we were also celebrating another very important day, which was the International Day for Biodiversity, under the theme Be Part of the Plan. At this occasion, we call to action to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Today's World Environmental Day is also under the theme of land restoration and drought resilience. This is the perfect occasion to bring to the forefront another of the Rio Conventions, that is the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, and the topic of land, which is crucial for the environment, for our planet, and for our future, as it has been also very clearly said by the two presenters during the videos that we showed. The Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, through the Agency for Development and Cooperation, has been supporting UNCCD with earmarked voluntary contributions since 1996, expressing its trust and also its support to a global governance framework addressing the issues of land degradation, land governance, and its recognized interlinkages. Soil is the foundation on which is based our biodiversity, our food production, our health, and our livelihoods. Soil is impacted by key international challenges, which are unsustainable resources management, climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, to name a few. This is why we have with us today such a wide panel of experts, from water and natural conservation to migration and human rights, from the humanitarian to the economic sectors. The composition of this panel demonstrates also the complexity of the discussion about land and its sustainable management. Switzerland is committed to strengthening a systemic and holistic response to sustainability through its various engagement. First, in land governance, with a specific focus on land rights, people-centered land governance, and responsible land investment. Secondly, in sustainable agricultural practices promoting agroecology as a transformative approach that reinforces food systems resilience through adapted and diversified farming systems. Thirdly, in research and innovation, which is context-specific, but should be focused on being participatory, accessible, and informing policies and decision-making. Finally, on striving for improved access, outreach, and inclusion, notably of youth, women, and marginalized population. Switzerland also calls for recognizing this complexity, joining efforts, and increasing synergies among all actors. Additionally, we call for supporting the Nexus approach and encouraging effective coordination and collaboration between the three Rio Conventions and similar global frameworks, but also between the three Rome-based agencies and development partners. The civil society and private sectors must also be included. I will end here my introductory remarks and hand over the floor to you, to the diverse experience and very valuable speakers that we have today, who will identify and also illustrate these various efforts and interlinkages to support land restoration and drought resilience. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much again, Ambassador. And I think you've highlighted to us again what's at stake, including for many of the issues that are discussed here in Geneva, including in humanitarian fields, but also, of course, and we should not forget that I think for those who are most at risk and the most marginalized populations, which face an especially dire threat when it comes to land degradation and drought. We've spoken, ladies and gentlemen, already a lot about the road to Riyadh. And so it's my great pleasure now to invite Ksenia Skandlin, the Chief of Communications, External Relations and Partnerships at the Secretariat of the UNCCD, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, to tell us a little bit more about the road to Riyadh and to COP16. Ksenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Arnold, Excellencies, UNEP Regional Director, colleagues. Well, first of all, allow me to congratulate Geneva Environment Network for organizing this event. I understand on good authority it might be the first time in 20 years that the land and drought issues are so much in focus at the international Geneva convenings through this format, and we really greatly appreciate that. So thank you very much to Diana and the team who have been working hard to put it together. And of course, very special thanks to the permanent missions of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the host country of both World Environment Day and COP16, and to the permanent mission of Switzerland, Ambassador Tony, for the long-standing support indeed to the environmental agenda. And as you've rightly pointed out, for us, really, synergies do begin at home across the Rio Conventions and beyond, and as we call land, indeed being the operative link in solving so many of the pressing challenges. Last but not least, thank you to all of you for being here. It's really encouraging to see so many partners being engaged in the land agenda and, of course, all the issues that intersect with it. This year's World Environment Day is actually a very important halfway point ahead of UNCCD COP16 in Riyadh. It is no mere coincidence that both take the theme of our land, our future. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, this year marks another important milestone, the 30th anniversary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which we'll be also celebrating later this month on the 17th of June. It's a very busy month for the environment. And indeed, since 1994, UNCCD has been ratified by 196 countries and the European Union, and I'm seeing a lot of our parties here today, which is again wonderful. And it is the voice of land in the United Nations system, as well as the custodian of the Sustainable Development Goal 15.3, which calls for all of us to reach a land degradation neutral world by 2030. As we look ahead to the road to Riyadh, the magnitude of the challenge before us is really captured by this quote of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. We depend on land for our survival, yet we treat it like dirt. And you've heard already that indeed degradation already affects up to 40% of the world's land, with dire consequences for biodiversity, for climate, for livelihoods, and so much more. And for football fans out there, you've heard a lot of big numbers there, but it roughly translates to 4 football pitches of healthy land becoming degraded every single second. If current trends persist, we will indeed need to restore 1.5 billion hectares of land between now and 2030. And currently, voluntary commitments come up to about 1 billion. So we have a gap of about half a billion hectares if we're proceeding at the pace of degradation that you've heard about earlier. Moreover, droughts are also hitting harder than ever, and in the past 2 decades, they have really become a very global phenomenon. In the Colorado River Basin in the United States, which is home to 40 million people, has seen its worst drought in 1,200 years. In Australia, the harshest drought in 800 years has been also called the Millennium Drought. In the Horn of Africa, 23 million people have been left severely food insecure, and you've seen these poignant images from the video message of the Executive Secretary of UNCCD. But also here in Europe, we've seen navigation, for instance, along the Rhine River almost come to a grind some years back because of the drought. And in Spain, some of the dams are registering water capacity at just 1% of their normal levels. So to address these challenges, we need the Riyadh COP not just to be a milestone, but also a moonshot moment for land. If you recall this very iconic image from the Voyager that really redefined the understanding of how we look at our planet and what we see as the future of our planet. This is what we hope the Riyadh COP will help us deliver, that shift, that change in the perception. And as the highest decision-making body of UNCCD, COP16 is indeed there to raise global attention, but also ambition and accelerate action on land and drought resilience through a people-centered approach. It will be a COP of many firsts. It will be the largest multilateral convening hosted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to date, the first UNCCD COP to be held in the Middle East and North Africa region, which is, of course, a region that knows firsthand the impacts of desertification, land degradation, and drought. And we also hope it will be the largest and most inclusive UNCCD COP to date, where we hope to welcome many more non-party stakeholders representing youth, civil society, private sector, local authorities, and so many more. If I could have a quick show of hands, how many of you have been to a UNCCD COP before? Okay, I've got a handful of hands. For us, one of our challenges is to see so many more hands next time we'll be preparing for COP17 and beyond. This is really your COP. It is our opportunity to really come together to discuss this agenda. So, to do this, for the first time in the UNCCD process, the COP will feature an action agenda. And this action agenda is really to mobilize all of us stakeholders around the 3 key pillars of people, of land, and of resilience. And to also do this across the 7 thematic days on land, resilience, people, agri-food systems. We've heard about their important role as well. governance, finance, and last but not least, science, technology, and innovation. In terms of expected outcomes, COP16 will contain both formal negotiated decisions as well as political declarations and new commitments under the action agenda, including on issues such as scaling up initiatives to restore those 1.5 billion hectares by 2030, but also start looking ahead beyond 2030 as to a potential longer-term target on land. Also agreeing on a collective global response to drought resilience and promoting international cooperation on issues such as the escalating impacts of sand and dust storms, advancing secure land tenure, as well as land-based opportunities for youth, for women, indigenous peoples, local communities, and last but not least, launching new initiatives to engage business and local authorities in land restoration and drought resilience. Furthermore, on the invitation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a leaders' summit is expected to be held on the 2nd and 3rd of December with participation of heads of state and government, CEOs, and other global leaders who will come together to identify concrete solutions to these challenges. In addition to the summit, high-level and ministerial dialogues will also be taking place during the first and the second week of the COP. And the UNCCD Secretariat is working closely with our host country, as well as partners across the UN system and beyond, on shaping thematic days and special events such as the Gender Caucus, the Youth Forum, and the Business for Land Forum. Last but not least, COP16 participants will also have an opportunity to showcase their work and impact across the blue and green zones. That's another first for us. We've never had blue and green zones before, as well as through pavilions and side events. Excellencies, colleagues, the Riyadh COP really promises to be an unmissable moment for all of us to reset the current trajectory and to really showcase that we can shape a world where land sustains present and future generations. As you've heard, this is already happening. Many countries and communities are showing that land restoration is both achievable and worthwhile. From the Sahara and Sahel regions, but also in places such as Central Asia and Central America, these initiatives are apace. What we need is to speed them up and scale them up. And to do that, we hope to see you all in Riyadh in just 6 months' time. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. As you have outlined to us, we are on the road to Riyadh. And as you have said, COP16, an unmissable moment to take action on land restoration. And you also described land as the operative link between many of the challenges that we face. And so, ladies and gentlemen, now we will dive a little bit deeper into this operational link, which is land, with many of the issues that humanity faces. And as has already been said, we are really fortunate to have so many leading experts with us today. I would ask the experts, however, to stick to the allocated 6 minutes because we have so many speakers. We need a little bit of discipline. I think I have a bell and a gavel. So I will decide which one of those two I will use, but you will get a little reminder from me when your time is up. But let's begin with Chanty Kirsch-Wood, who is a Senior Program Management Officer at the Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Development Branch of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much to the organizers for this really important opportunity to share with you all some of the critical links around the issues of desertification, land generation, restoration, and disaster risk reduction. Let me just check if our slides are moving. Yes, perfect. Okay, so the first point really that I think has already been underscored, but is so important to recognize, are the costs of these events on our collective people, planet, and prosperity. It's absolutely critical that we get a handle on land restoration, on desertification, and on the impacts of these events on people, planet, and prosperity if we are to achieve the SDGs and to create a sustainable future fit for future generations. And those costs really cut across all sectors of the SDGs, but they also have solutions. And when we look at the priority areas of the Sendai framework around disaster risk reduction, we see that the actions around, for example, understanding risk better, we see actions to improve governance, we see actions to enable improved methods for sharing the costs in a collective manner across the public, the private, and the wider communities, but also the opportunities for building forward better and creating a collective future are all there. And so we see very strong links between those priority areas of the Sendai framework, which are really looking at risk reduction and preventing future disasters, and the outcomes of these particular conventions. And we see great synergies across them. Because it's very clear that drought and drought responses are systemic, the problems are integrated, that we have challenges both in managing not only the hazards, but in their cascading and their compounding impacts. And apologies, this slide is a little bit small, I realize, for this audience. But what you see here is that when we look at the cycle that we are locked in currently, we see that it's not only about the water, it's about the vulnerability and the exposure. So the vulnerability of particular systems, of particular communities, of particular populations, and understanding where those vulnerabilities are, understanding how exposure is changing. And if we can look across that hazard, exposure, and vulnerability and address it, we have the solutions in hand to be able to reverse these trends and really create a foundation for much more sustainable development that can underpin our collective future. And we can see this, for example, in just very much some work that we did last year, looking at, for example, the connection between drought risk and food insecurity. If you look here, you can already see that many parts of the world in the current scenario, we see a real connection between the food system and where drought risk is most prevalent. And this is of great concern because we see, of course, if we don't reverse trends, this map will continue to become more at risk. And under this second piece of research looking at, for example, under a 2-degree scenario, you can see the difference in the potential countries and the potential risk to food insecurity. So today our challenge is really working together to put those solutions in place that can make sure that as we move forward collectively, those solutions really are in place and that risk is reduced. And as I think we will learn later, we've seen this work in places across the Sahel. We've also seen it work in South America. We've seen it work in urban environments. The tools are there for reducing risk. And when you reduce the risk of land degradation, you also reduce the risk of cascading impacts such as landslides, mud flows, disaster risks, and you can create more sustainable livelihoods for communities. So I think that those options really are critical for us to explore. And it's also clear that we need to really harness innovative solutions. It's absolutely essential that we look at where we can work across our silos. If you see the developments that are happening now in terms of the energy transition, but also the transition in urban environment, in planning, in academia, we have a lot of different ways, if we can look a little bit across people, planet, and prosperity, that we can see about creating solutions to land degradation that move it out from just a Ministry of Agriculture to a shared all of society approach, similar to how we're beginning to work more in the disaster risk reduction community. And we see those opportunities need to engage people at all levels. It's not only appropriate to have a word from on high. Where we can really become most effective is where we engage participation, we engage communities, we look at how different communities that might have been considered vulnerable can actually become leaders in creating those sustainable solutions. And we can see that backed up by effective governance and effective alignment of financing, that takes a realistic approach to sharing costs across the public and the private sector. And so I'd just like to, end by reminding people that we did work very closely in 2021 on a joint drought report. There are 21 case studies from around the world about good solutions to managing drought risk in a more integrated way. And I really would invite you to take a look at some of those examples. I'd also invite you to take a look at some of the more recent work through our global assessment reports that have looked into some of these issues about how land restoration can be so critical to achieving the SDGs. And I'd like to say that as we move forward, I hope that we can really begin to look at some of the global mechanisms and the resources through things like the COP that can help us secure that collective future. Thank you.
Thank you, Genti, for these important perspectives from UNDRR. The Climate and Environment Charter is a new initiative for humanitarian organizations to step up the response to growing humanitarian needs and help people adapt to the impacts of climate change, but also the related environmental crises. And so let me introduce to you Nishanye Chayamaha, who is the coordinator of the Secretariat. Nishanye, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Anil. Thank you for having me here. I must say, normally when I go for one of these meetings, I would know quite a few faces or they're familiar, but this is one of the first times I actually know only 2 people in this room. So this is another reason we're here to look at how do we connect better with the humanitarian sector, the climate, the environment, development, DRR. We're all working, unfortunately, in silos, and it's important at this crucial moment that we get together and we do better and we actually collaborate and collectively work towards a goal. And this is exactly why we started the Climate and Environment Charter for humanitarian organizations, because humanitarian actors work in most of the countries. And if you really look at the NDGAIN index, over half of the countries that are climate vulnerable are actually also in conflict or in fragile contexts or in complex emergencies. You take South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan, the list can go on. And Genti pointed out about food insecurity. Again, the same story and the same scenario. Most of the same countries in conflict are also extremely food insecure. And we have obviously the East Horn of Africa in famine. So the context humanitarian actors work in, we're no strangers to climate change, but we don't really look at some of the impacts we're seeing as climate impacts. If you talk to a humanitarian, they'll say, yeah, it's a natural disaster, or it's a cyclical event like monsoons, etc. We're responding to floods, cyclones, drought now, which was not always the case. Now we're seeing different issues like land degradation. We're seeing desertification, people moving. We're working in places like the Sahel, for example, and people are moving from one context to the other. So why are we looking at conflict context and looking at environment and the way we work? We're really finding it difficult, and I forgot completely to turn on the timer, so I expect you to ring a bell. Thank you. If I could have thank you so much, the slide. So we decided to develop this charter. The ICRC IFRC, together with the humanitarian committee, realized that there is a need to raise awareness among the humanitarian actors to also look at our own environment footprint, our own sustainability, but also looking at how do we build better resilience among communities and our own organizations to respond to an ever-escalating complex emergency, including climate context. So it's an ambitious commitments that we have seen, and we are very happy to say that we have over 400 signatories right now, including supporters to the charter that are 13 member states, including the EU, and it's a diverse amount. We have IOM from the UN agencies who are also a signatory to the Charter. We have local, national NGOs, civil society, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, national societies who've signed up to the Charter, because we see that this is an emerging issue that we're really having to deal with in contexts that we're dealing with in conflict and high-risk environments. So if you look at what we're trying to work on and looking at the convergences of drought and land degradation, if you look at the 7 commitments that are up there, the first commitment and the second commitment are the backbone of this particular charter. So we're supporting and looking at how in humanitarian context, conflict, complex emergency context, are we taking into consideration land, for example? Are we helping our communities who are looking at small-scale programs and projects while responding to displacement, while responding to a refugee crisis in conflict context, of how they're actually improving their work of looking at providing livelihood in areas where there are high vulnerabilities, but at the same time, looking at how are we then providing better expertise across these contexts where we don't have expertise as humanitarians, linking them up with those who have expertise, such as in the agriculture area or the sectors of fisheries, for example, to improve the way we work in the way we respond. One of the ways to look at land degradation and to minimize land degradation is to look at how are we looking at flood mitigation technologies where we stop flooding, where the topsoil is eroded, right? But this is something we're not super used to, but we're now trying to do this in context where there's no development actors or no other actors that is looking at risk reduction. In terms of looking at the commitment 2, how is waste management, for example, managed in camp settings, refugee, IDP camp settings, and in settings of conflict contexts where there are no country systems. There's no systems in the waste management systems existing at central government level, for example. We have been setting some of these up in these contexts so that already water, land is not getting polluted. Also looking at wars and conflicts are actually impacting our land. You look at Ukraine right now, and any other conflict context. I'm Sri Lankan, we've gone through 30 years of war. Some of the areas where we've had conflict for 30 years, it's still, somebody asked me about restoration today. It's still recovering, and this is after 30 years of war. We finished the war in 2009. It's still regrowing, and that is going to take time. And how would that look like when there is contamination because of conflicts and because of war? We are also looking at how do you support local action? And this is key. As humanitarian actors, we're not really good at looking at indigenous knowledge. We're trying to improve. How do you look at indigenous knowledge of seeds for drought-resistant seeds that were in the past? In context, we've had these before, but now because of monoculture or because of mass production and economic livelihood importance, we've gone backwards. Now we need to look at what is there before. And we've been talking to communities to say, well, you had this before, how can we reuse it? Where do we find it? We need to build these connections to say, where can we find some of these? How are some of the older practices of farming methods can be reintroduced in contexts where there is conflict? People are on the move, they're coming back to their land. But how are they then looking at these options? If there's drought, where there are drought-resistant seeds? If there's salinity, like in Bangladesh, how are you looking at seeds that are much more better at thriving in these contexts where there is more salinity in the water? So talking to people, looking at communities and what they're doing, also ensuring that we're looking at climate risk analysis and conflict sensitivity in the work we're doing better and integrating that, looking at better early warning systems, early action mechanisms. We saw when the East Horn of Africa, as humanitarian actors, we raised the awareness about the upcoming droughts and famine. It took until the famine hit for the rest of the world to realize, oh, there's a famine. It's too late by then. We are behind. We need to raise the bar of how do we raise awareness among the communities of development, humanitarian, climate actors, so that we act early, that we're prepared early. And this is something that we're trying to do better among the humanitarian community, but also connecting, as our fifth commitment is collecting collaborative action. How do we connect, collaborate better among the sectors? And at country level, we see that there is a huge amount of connections that need to be made, because this is where action happens. And at country level, there is a huge potential to work better together across the humanitarian development piece. And now we see more and more the climate nexus. Unfortunately, don't like to bring this topic of nexus, but that is the case. At ground level, for a community, these siloed systemic approaches we're using are not what it is. For them, their needs maybe today is I need water, food, shelter. Tomorrow, I am looking for a livelihood. I need to make sure my children are educated. So when you're looking at these siloed approaches on the ground, you and I, and even when we're looking at it, our approaches are not siloed. So we need to make sure that the way we work and how we are how our programming and how we're actually looking at all these big UN COPs, et cetera, that we're looking at people-centered approaches. And I'm extremely happy to hear that it is a people-centered approach, but also taking into consideration the ecosystem around us. Thank you very much. You can connect with us as a new initiative. Please do check out our website online, and you can connect with us at the email address as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishania, for telling us more about the Charter. We will stay with the theme or the imperative of disaster risk reduction as we look at the theme for this year's World Environment Day. And we will do that thanks to Nicholas Bishop, who is the disaster risk reduction lead at the International Organization for Migration. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arnold. I'd like to express sincere appreciation to Deanna and the International Geneva organizing team for the invitation to address you today to mark the occasion of World Environment Day. From IOM's perspective, and it comes as no surprise based on everything that's already been said today, but the world is obviously witnessing an unprecedented surge in drought, land degradation, and desertification exacerbated by climate change. These factors are reshaping migration and driving millions of people from their homes. In the last 2 years, as UNCCD member states report, nearly 2 billion people, that's a quarter of humanity, were living under drought conditions. I think that's something that's very clear from some of the slides that Genti shared. The vast majority of these people living in low and middle income countries. Now, the impacts of climate change are driving higher than ever levels of intense and frequent droughts, which are reversing the coping and adaptive capacities of vulnerable communities, where IOM obviously recognizes migration as an adaptation strategy. In 2023, 26.4 million new internal displacements in the context of disasters were recorded, with more than 500,000 people being displaced by drought. While floods and storms continue to grab major headlines, unfortunately, the insidious effects of drought combined with extreme heat and water scarcity are increasingly becoming lethal. Moreover, the long-term consequences of desertification and land degradation driven by climate change are steadily eroding livelihoods and forcing communities to seek new homes. By 2050, nearly all regions of the world will be at an elevated risk of severe drought, with 25% of all countries at extreme risk. If you allow me, I'd like to run through 3 examples. In 3 years from 2021 to 2023, drought triggered more than 1.5 million displacements in Somalia. This year in Afghanistan, 25 of 34 provinces are suffering from severe or catastrophic drought conditions, affecting more than half the population of 40 million people. Recurrent droughts in already fragile contexts are undermining community resilience and forcing many to abandon their livelihoods and move to informal settlements near major cities, displacing internally or migrating to neighboring countries. And finally, my third example comes from Central America. The dry corridor, as you may know, is home to more than 10 million people. At least 500,000 people living there suffer from severe food insecurity. 65% of families don't have food reserves, so to survive, they frequently migrate to urban areas. They reduce the portions of frequency of the food they consume, they buy cheaper and less varied food, they sell livestock, and they resort to taking out loans. This permanent situation and the resulting impacts on health, livelihoods, and economic productivity has forced hundreds of thousands to migrate. Droughts often intersect with existing fragilities, exacerbating food and water insecurity, economic hardship, and social instability. This combination of factors makes communities more susceptible to displacement and other forms of harm. As IOM, we know that migration can be a crucial, even life-saving strategy for adapting to climate change. At the same time, the right to move in the face of environmental threats is intrinsically linked to human dignity, security, and the right to a healthy environment. Therefore, I think the understanding of these characteristics and the development of drought events and their societal impacts is really crucial to anticipating and reducing risk while improving emergency response and preparedness. In late March, a new regional anticipatory action framework for the dry corridor was launched by the Central Emergency Response Fund. Once a severe drought is forecast, the aim is to reach vulnerable people before the humanitarian impacts of a shock. IOM believes the best approach to enhancing resilience and adaptation, as Nishani has rightfully pointed out, comes from partnership and broad-based partnership, working with academia, our sister agencies in the UN and the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, civil society, and directly with communities to leverage their skills, expertise, and resources. Improving disaster preparedness and early warning systems is essential for global drought resilience. IOM is already using its extensive data collection resources to lead on the development of real-time alert systems for transhumance movements now in 13 countries across the Sahel and the Horn of Africa to minimize conflict over increasingly scarce water resources. We know that timely and accurate information on drought conditions enables proactive mobility decision-making and effective responses to displacement. That is also why IOM is an active partner in the national level rollout of the Early Warnings for All initiative. I would also just like to highlight that IOM is actively supporting member states and partners in drought, land degradation, and desertification efforts around the world. Notably, I would highlight the development of the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change, which represents the first ever regional policy framework to address human mobility in the context of climate change. In September of last year, the declaration was expanded to become a continental initiative, where one of the key commitments underscores the role of state parties to address desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the primary drivers of poverty and forced mobility. In countries impacted by drought across the Sahel and increasingly southern Africa, where drought continues to hit already vulnerable communities that have not had the time to recover from previous shocks, IOM is contributing to rebuilding livelihoods via rapid cash transfers, business development programming, and community development projects, including provision of access to clean water. In closing, drought, land degradation, and desertification, amplified by climate change, poses an immense challenge to global stability and human well-being. Safe, orderly, and dignified migration and robust land restoration efforts must be vital components of any effective response. Addressing the root causes of this crisis demands concerted action from all sectors of society. And by prioritizing the needs of displaced communities and investing in long-term resilience, we can work towards a future where migration is a choice, not a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas, for joining us today and sharing these perspectives from IOM with us. Veronica Ruiz is a program manager on climate and disaster resilience at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And we will hear from Veronica a little bit more about nature-based solutions. And while Veronica gets ready, let me just briefly say that as we celebrated World Environment Day in 2021, here in Geneva, we did so also through a series of events around nature-based solutions that the Geneva Environment Network has organized together with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And that was also 1 year before the UN Environment Assembly adopted a resolution on nature-based solutions. So Veronica, please tell us a little bit more about the role that nature-based solution can play in protecting our land.
Thanks, Arnold, and thank you so much to the Geneva Environment Network team. Always delighted to be here within your organized events, and thank you for reminding these 2021 events that we were running for a whole journey, starting with health and finishing with people. The importance of nature-based solutions as people-centered approaches. That sometimes we forget that biodiversity and people go hand by hand. And today I'm here celebrating with all of you on the 5th of June of 2024 World Environment Day, talking about drought and land. As an Andalusian coming from the south of Spain, I remember when I was a child, always facing this water cut every summer, the same. We didn't have water for when you come back from the beach and then you want to shower. Well, no, there is no water. There is again a cut and again a cut. Now, I have been living in Switzerland for 14 years, and I have my 2 little babies with 1 year old, and I think it will be the time for them also to face water cuts and drought here in Switzerland. Also, we can see that is not a only southern problem. This is a problem that is expanding worldwide, and it seems like now it is being more recognized because it's reaching out other lands. Just to recall you, it was back on 2022, one of the most well-known World Heritage Sites, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, also in Spain, the Doñana wetlands. The last wetland disappeared back in 2022 because of drought. So this is a real problem that we should not underestimate. I'm thinking about this. I don't want to talk to you about all the negative data that we can literally check in every single report that there is there out. But this is the situation we are facing today. Population is increasing for more than 8 billion by 2050. And of course, this is requiring an increase on the demand on natural resources, resources that we depend upon. And of course, those resources will be affected also by climate change and biodiversity loss. But not only biodiversity loss, also the degradation of land, and especially when it comes to soil biodiversity. We don't see this biodiversity, but then it's there, and it's the base of our life. Also very important when it comes to biodiversity, and maybe we just think about biodiversity as the big species, the big mammals. They are disappearing. But biodiversity is really, we are facing a decline faster than any time in human history. Abundance of native species has decreased 20% since 1900, and natural ecosystems have decreased for 47%. Can you imagine 47% decrease on natural ecosystems? This is massive, massive data. And since in between 1900 and 2013, we have been facing 620,000 drought events worldwide. This is incredible numbers. Let's not go to the data, but let's also think about the positive things and what we can do together. A colleague, Xenia, she was mentioning about ambitious. We need to be ambitious. We need to work together. Also, from UNDRR, you were talking about being innovative. Nashin talking about breaking the silos and inclusiveness. So let's do this together. And we can do this together through nexus approaches. And when I talk about nexus approaches, is really bringing all the different components together. We talk about bringing climate, bringing nature, bringing people all together. But we have to be also thoughtful about different things that we have to think about. So first of all is the complexity. The systems are very complex. We have to think about the whole system as it is. And that is why I'm bringing also not only the nature component, economic component, but also cultural component and society component. So far, we are not thinking about much of like what is the culture and the importance on culture where we are working on drought management type of context. But also, we have to think about complex system, but also complex interactions. And for this, we need to put in place comprehensive plannings that need to bring on board all the different actors that are involved. That is what colleague UNDR was mentioning about bringing communities. We have to bring local communities, indigenous peoples, academy, government, private sector. We have to bring on board all the different actors to be able to really put in place solutions that are comprehensive and that are holistic to be able to tackle the problem at the landscape level. But also very important to think about currently there is no link in between drought and ecosystem degradation. It's a little bit the beginning of the discussion, but it's something that has to be much more reinforced. And why? Because, as I mentioned, soil health is very important. The increase of soil health will definitely trigger an increase of drought resilience, and not only drought resilience, but also people and nature resilience. And it is very important as well. Just think about terrestrial ecosystems. What is the role of terrestrial ecosystem? There is a role in the hydrological cycle. We will have more access to water, we will have more evapotranspiration, and so on, and going through the whole cycle. But what is very important into this as well is to think about the co-benefits. And this is when we talk about nature-based solutions as an important solution for tackling drought. Nature-based solution, which really aligns with the different different speeches that my colleagues of IOM, IFRC, and UNDRR have been mentioning about really being innovative, inclusive, and breaking the silos. And by saying this, it is very important that we think about and putting in place ecosystem-based drought responses for really making sure that we are linking droughts to land and ecosystem health, to making sure that we are strengthening institutional capacities, and also that we are putting in place this complementary plan, that we are coming together and we are facilitating as well the discussion in between different sectors. But also importantly is to really increase the access to drought finance for local stakeholders. We talk about like global discourse to be put in place at the local level, but rather it's like how local solutions can really trigger a transformative change at the global level and to be able to influence global policies. When you're talking about policies, to foster policy coherence across sector conventions and interventions. We have 3 Rio Conventions. We are there in the way of connecting more the 3 Rio Convention, but we are in 2024, UNCCD, we are going into the COP30 next year. So we have been discussing for 30 years on how we come together. Maybe the Nexus approaches are the connector. Our land is our connector to be able to have a similar discourse. And for this, I have to say, just to finish, IUCN will be releasing a report on nature-based solutions and droughts. It will be published on the 30th of June with a soft launch on the 8th of July, and I will really invite all of you to go through. There will be plenty of case studies and more on the policy context. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica. We have talked already a lot about droughts in the context of protecting our land. And we cannot, of course, discuss this topic without looking also at the cooperation around shared water resources. A warm welcome, Sonja. Sonja Köppel is the secretary at UNEC for the Water Convention. And she will dive a little bit deeper into the importance of cooperation around these important resources. Sonja.
Thank you very much for organizing this important event and for inviting me here today. So many have already stressed that land and water are closely related. And actually, land, droughts, and water do not no borders. Globally, more than 60% of water resources are shared between 2 or more countries, and more than 40% of the world population lives in such shared basins. That's why cooperation across borders is so important in climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction, drought management, because it can actually help to not only prevent negative impacts of unilateral measures, but also to actually make adaptation more effective and efficient. By sharing data across borders, by early warning from one country to another, by also locating measures where they have an optimum effect. In some cases, water storage infrastructure can be more efficiently located in another place in the basin. It can also support adaptation planning at the country level, and it can actually help to share costs and benefits. However, globally, cooperation is not enough advanced. If we look at the latest results from 2024 on the SDG indicator 6.5.2 on Transboundary water cooperation, for which UNESCO and UNCCD we are the co-custodian agencies, we can see that only 26 countries actually have operational arrangements for cooperation on all their shared basins. And 63% of transboundary basins worldwide do not have coordinated alarm system for droughts, for example, or 60% do not have joint disaster risk reduction strategies. So this shows there is a lot to do. And that's why actually just 3 months ago, under the leadership of Switzerland and Netherlands, together with UNCCD, UNDRR, WMO, World Bank and INBO, we organized a global workshop on droughts in transboundary basins here in Geneva. And I don't have time to talk about all the outcomes of this workshop, but it has clearly shown the importance of including these issues into, for example, transboundary agreements, of developing such transboundary water cooperation agreements in a flexible way with specific provisions, for example, on land, on drought, and on water allocation, for example. It has also shown the importance of monitoring data exchange, etc., of allocating sufficient resources, and the importance of transboundary basin organizations addressing those topics. And for example, Ibrahim Thiaw mentioned the drought in the 70s. That was also the occasion for the countries in the Senegal Basin to come together and to create the Senegal Basin Development Organization, which has actually then developed shared infrastructure, joint hydropower plants between those Senegal, Mauritania, Guinea, and Mali. So the Water Convention is a now global legal and intergovernmental framework and platform exactly to promote transboundary water cooperation, asking countries or requiring countries to cooperate across borders. With 130 countries taking part in our meetings and activities now. And already back in 2006, a task force on water and climate was created, exactly helping countries to build capacity through activities at regional and global level, for example, this recent drought workshop. Also through a global network of basins working on climate change, which includes 18 basins from around the world. And also through engagement into global processes, like I just came back from Bonn now from the climate change meetings. And we also have pilot projects on the ground where we actually help countries to concretely cooperate across borders in flood and drought risk management, climate change adaptation, etc. And I don't have time to speak about all of them, but I would take one specific example where actually in Eastern Europe, UNCCD together with OCE, UNDP, UNEP, other actors, ZOE, etc., we have helped the countries in the Dniester River Basin, which is shared between Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, to establish first cooperation on technical issues, and later on more political cooperation, which led to the Dniester Agreement and the Dniester Commission established just a few years ago. And here we can say the Dniester Transboundary Agreement is actually including issues related to water allocation, water flow, prevention of effects of emergencies. And the Dniester Commission has then also set up a specific working group, for example, on emergencies, including flood and droughts, because that basin, like many others, is actually facing the two challenges, floods and droughts. In addition, in the process over the last more than 10 years, we have helped and worked with the countries to develop a transboundary adaptation strategy, a strategic framework for climate change adaptation in the Dniester River Basin, which includes also a number of measures exactly regarding water scarcity and droughts. And later on, this led to funding from a Global Environment Facility and so-called development of a strategic action program. And that was also accompanied by specific measures implemented, for example, on better operation of the hydropower stations, on wetland restoration, and awareness-raising activities. So to conclude, I would just like to invite you all to another important meeting this year, which is the meeting of the parties of the Water Convention that will be held on 23 to 25 of October in Slovenia, with a high-level segment on exactly focused on climate change adaptation and transboundary cooperation. We look forward to welcoming many countries and ministers at this occasion. And we look forward also to further strengthening the cooperation with UNCCD and many other actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Another important conference that has kicked off this week here in Geneva is the International Labour Conference. And with the help of Manal Atzi, who leads the work on occupational safety and health at the ILO, we will now look a little bit more into the impacts that land degradation and drought has on occupational health. Manal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I feel now it's a race towards the end, so I'm going to rush through this. I don't think we can hear the bell. Use the gravel if you need to. I'm here to talk about the world of work and the implications and the work we've done with the various parties across the table, and also to give it the human-centered approach and the rights approach that my colleagues will also build on. So restoring land and stopping desertification, building drought resilience are essential to sustainable future of work. We have an estimated 1.2 billion jobs that depend on healthy and well-functioning ecosystems. We know that agriculture is one of the biggest employers and that is highly affected by this. Desertification, land degradation impact negatively on jobs and lead to unwanted migration, which we heard about, and exacerbate crisis situations. So we want to say that a positive narrative is possible. We have an enormous opportunity to create decent work through programs and on land restoration using employment-intensive approaches, public work programs, and enterprise development. The ILO, along with the United Nations Environment Programme and the International Union, which we heard of for conservation of nature earlier, produced the first assessment of decent work in nature-based solutions. We found that over 75 million people around the world work in nature-based solutions, including in restoring, rehabilitating, degrading ecosystems. Tripling investments in these nature-based solutions can lead up to an additional 20 million jobs. So what we want to highlight is that the actors of the world of work, we're talking about governments, ministries of labor, employers and workers who are currently causing all the traffic around Geneva. We have over 5,000 people at the labor conference in the Palais these 2 weeks. They are essential in this fight against desertification and restoring land, and they have an important role to give effect to the UN Convention to combat desertification. And the UNCCD and the ILO concluded an agreement to that effect to deepen collaboration. So we encourage in practical ways, ways we can further collaborate to reflect employment and social dimensions. We heard about the culture element earlier. So there are so many different dimensions where we would have an intensified global effort. So we do look forward to working with the parties and the UNCCD in the road towards Riyadh. I think Riyadh is leading on so many aspects at the moment in the area of environment, but also in health globally. We just had the 6th Global Conference of Occupational Safety and Health that was hosted there. But I want to just quickly divert to one of our latest reports on climate change, which is very much related, that we launched last month. I didn't use my presentation actually at all. And this is actually the slide I want to come to, and we can see on the slide. So when we talk about climate change, especially the impact on workers and safety and health of workers. We're talking about excessive heat. We have new numbers globally of people exposed. But what is more related to the discussion today is, I think, the rise in extreme weather events. We're talking about wildfires, flooding, and the droughts that we've discussed at length. And I think in this report, we can see very good relations with the issues that we're discussing, but also the rising number of people living with disease, millions of people living with disease due to excessive heat exposure, UV radiation, the increase in vector-borne diseases affecting agricultural workers globally, but also the changes in pests and the pesticides that are increasing due to the changing patterns of rainfall, changing seasonality of certain crops, and all of this is interlinked with the discussion today. So I think the report, and you can find it online, obviously has a lot of detail on the solutions, and solutions are legal frameworks, policy solutions, but also interventions at workplace levels. We're talking across all economic sectors globally. And the numbers speak for themselves, and some of the existing international conventions of the ILO provide for protections for workers and provide for the role of these actors in finding further developed solutions for the crises we face related to the environment. But more importantly, I think the main message we want to leave with today is that humans are an important factor leading to the solution, and protecting human health is central to workers globally. We have, we're talking about 4 billion workers globally that are affected by these changes. Their livelihoods are affected, and their social protection and social well-being is affected by this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manal. I did not have to use the bell or the gavel. So thank you very much, and also for highlighting the operative link, as we have said, that land plays, in safeguarding human health, and in particular occupational health. Geneva is, of course, also the capital of human rights. The universal human right to a clean and healthy environment has already been mentioned. Therese Arnesen works at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Therese, over to you to tell us a little bit more about the operative link that land can play in the context of human rights.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you so much for having us. Why human rights? Human rights are impacted and part of the solutions to the issues that we're discussing today. I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but it's really important that we spell out the impacts, that we make these interlinkages with states' obligations that are triggered by these impacts, and that we name the rights holders in this regards. And that's part of the reasons why we're advocating so fiercely for human rights to be integrated in the decisions and the outcomes of the different Rio conventions, and not only those. Desertification, land degradation, and drought both directly and indirectly affects enjoyment of a wide range of human rights. We've already heard the right to food, the right to water and sanitation, and health, among other rights. The myriad consequences include, in particular, also food supply disruption and forced migrations, as we heard from colleagues. And it's really important to us to highlight that the people that are most affected are those that are already in vulnerable situations. Vulnerability is a construction. We already heard many of them mentioned, just wanted to highlight again, women and girls, indigenous peoples, and also peasants and other people working in rural areas. Human rights defenders working on land-related issues are also among those defenders that are most at risk. We really want to highlight that. For example, in issues related to land grabbing, that again is related to what we're talking about today. Women, the big elephant in the room, women's access to land, for example, in the Middle East and North Africa, according to a 2022 report by the UNCCD, stands at 4%. Women and girls are also more likely to be impacted by desertification than, for example, men, in particular where agriculture is the main source of livelihood. So again, we come back to livelihoods, we come back to the right to food, the very essentials of our lives. Because of the impacts that desertification, land degradation, and drought have on human rights, these trigger state obligations. And there's also a business responsibility herein. Businesses have a responsibility to respect human rights and therefore to avoid infringing on the human rights of others and they also have a responsibility to address adverse human rights impacts. And that relates, those impacts that are related to land degradation and drought. And businesses are really key when we talk about solutions, when we talk about decarbonizing the economy, halting biodiversity loss, and transforming food systems. Again, the human rights-based approach is really people-centered. So when we talk about the right to meaningful and informed participation in decision-making, that's really key. And I was really happy to hear also mentioned earlier, drawing on, for example, the knowledge of indigenous peoples when we talk about how to move forward and create resilience by actually moving backwards and using what we already had that has been lost. When we talk about participation, we're so happy to already be able to mention two important COP decisions, Decision 26 from COP 14 and Decision 27 from COP 15, that are really making explicit references to non-discrimination and participation and access to land for all, in particular groups in vulnerable situations. So that's the essence of the human rights-based approach, really. It's not more complicated than that. Also, the second Global Land Outlook really highlighted human rights-based approaches as an important entry point for this. Thank you, Arnold, for mentioning the right to a healthy environment. Healthy ecosystems is really an important part of that right. And therefore, guaranteeing that right really requires that states and businesses take measures to combat desertification, land degradation, and drought. I wanted to conclude by looking a little bit on the work of the human rights system and the UN human rights system, where we can also need some help from all of you, actually. We have treaty bodies, special procedures, and universal periodic review. Some of those important mechanisms have already done some work related, bringing up desertification and land degradation and drought in their work, linking it to human rights and proposing guidance and recommendations for how states should address that. We have, of course, the Special Rapporteur on the right to food. We have the Special Rapporteur on environment, but we also have two treaty bodies that have been very active on this. The Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights have issued what they call general recommendations and general comments that offer interpretations of the legal framework for how states should apply that to promote and protect and fulfill human rights. So again, more on the side of land specifically, CEDAW has highlighted how states should address threats to rural women, and therein, they really specifically mention climate change, natural disasters, land and soil degradation, drought and desertification. And they have also mentioned this important link between land and the rights of indigenous women and girls specifically. The Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights issued a general comment, which is a really interesting piece of work that talks about land and economic, social, cultural rights. So from the human rights system, land is really always looked at through what it means for the realization of other rights. That's key to us. And then we see that in total, we only have a handful of recommendations to states from these different mechanisms that talk about land degradation, drought, and desertification specifically, and you could all help in that. Civil society and member states, you can make recommendations, you can submit shadow reports to these different mechanisms and help making these interlinkages. That would be an important entry point for us. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Therese. Geneva is, and Switzerland is also the home to the 4 chemicals and waste-related conventions, but also to UNEP's Chemicals and Health branch and the Secretariat of the Global Framework on Chemicals. Manuela Pessoa de Miranda, however, works for the Minamata Convention on Mercury, one of these 4 conventions that UNEP hosts administratively here in Geneva. And Manuela, you will tell us a little bit more about how the Minamata Convention also helps to protect our land. Manuela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Good morning, good afternoon for those who are connecting virtually. A heartfelt thanks to the government of Switzerland and Saudi Arabia for offering this opportunity for us to discuss. Let me just move these a bit away. And also to Diana, of course, and the entire Geneva Environment Network for this opportunity. It's so important. It's these opportunities for us to raise awareness of our work, but also to establish new connections and partnerships are crucial to our work. I'm going to be talking about something that's relatively uncommon when we talk about land degradation, which is mercury pollution. Mercury, very briefly, mercury is a naturally occurring chemical that's extremely toxic. We all have mercury in our bodies, hopefully at levels that are not detrimental to our health. But those unfortunate ones who have higher levels have their lives impacted, sometimes permanently and very, very severely. So let me just see if I can move these slides. Yes. The connections to land degradation happening in many, many ways, but the primary source of mercury pollution that we are interested in is human-based activities. And because this has raised the levels of mercury that are freely available to over 500 times the natural levels. Deforestation, for example, which is one of the major reasons for land degradation, contributes to about 10% of the mercury that is circulating in the atmosphere currently. Not only that, that mercury that travels then deposits in the soil and contaminates our food. And that's how humans are mostly exposed, but also wildlife. It has a huge impact on biodiversity as well. So there is this feedback loop that we need to break of land degradation, deforestation, mercury pollution, all feeding into each other and exacerbating the problem even more. The main source of man-made pollution, in addition to deforestation I mentioned, was about 10%. Nearly 50% comes from artisanal gold mining, where mercury is actually purposefully added to this activity to be able to extract gold, many times from rivers, but it's really in the sediments that gold is. What you see at the top right, at the top left corner of the slide used to be a river in the Amazon in Peru. That river, that particular place, the river was about 40 meters wide, and it's now this what we call a desert wetland, if it makes any sense. But it's about 2 kilometers wide and 80 kilometers long, and that's one river. This is happening to many, many rivers in the Amazon, but also in other parts of the world, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. There are other pictures there showing the devastation. The problem with this is that on the one hand, we have over 100 million people who depend on artisanal gold mining for their livelihoods. For many of them, this is the only source of income that they have. So this is a lifeline for many people. On the other hand, we heard today about land grabbing, and this is also a huge problem because it's so easy to obtain mercury and to go into someone else's land where the laws are not strong enough to enforce. There is a problem that's widespread also in the Amazon, but in Africa increasingly, and also in Southeast Asia, where local communities and indigenous peoples are being invaded, their lands and territories are being invaded by outsiders looking for that gold and bringing mercury pollution. So they destroy the environment, they extract as much as they can, and move away without leaving any benefits to the local communities and indigenous peoples. Particularly women and children are extremely vulnerable to this. And it's also linked to organized crime in much larger scale because the gold is funding conflict in many areas. It's also linked to human trafficking, slavery, forced prostitution, and many other sources of many other types of crime. It's a very sad, urgent, and really dramatic situation for those who are suffering from this. So this is where we work. There's a sentence on the slides that I read it 2 days ago from the government of Brazil, launched the document where they say that the artisanal gold mining and mercury pollution is a complex issue where no simplification is possible. So it really encapsulates the need that we have to work across partners and work across sectors. So thanks, I will rush. So the Minamata Convention is working across many activities. We work primarily about phasing out the use of mercury to prevent new land degradation and other environmental degradations and then human health problems. We have contaminated sites, practices, and so on. We build capacity of countries and raise awareness. But the thing that I would like to highlight the most is the notion of a whole of society and whole of government approaches, which we are very, very much behind, and we are supporting this and moving towards doing this effectively. Across this table, we work with the Office of Human Rights, we work with ILO, we work with the UNCCD, and I hope to work with other partners as well on this table and beyond. And in the future, just to highlight a few things that I would like to see is to work more on land restoration. We already do, but I would like our programs and projects on the ground related to mercury reduction to always restore land to what it was before they were those lands were mined, and also to work towards a global traceability system for gold, to ensure that no gold comes from conflict areas, that the gold that goes into the international trade really is not fueling more conflict on the ground, and prevent the impact on indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. And with that, I thank you very much, and sorry I went a little beyond the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for sharing these important perspectives from the Minamata Convention with us. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we will go to the World Economic Forum and hear a bit more about the role of the private sector in accelerating solutions towards land restoration and why it is so important to involve the private sector in all of this. Willem Berlees is the regional lead in Europe and Africa for an initiative called 1T.org. At the World Economic Forum. Willem, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arno, and it's a pleasure to be here. 1T.org is the World Economic Forum's Trillion Trees initiative that was launched 4 years ago in support of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. We've heard a lot, Thanks. We've heard a lot today about why we should be acting on land, and then the question arises, why should business be working on land? And Xenia pointed out there's a gap in terms of action, and there's also an impact from the private sector. But I'm taking a slightly different perspective right now, and the question is, from a business perspective, from a company's personal perspective, as it were, why should they act? And there are definitely, impacts from migration, from conflict. All of these things impact business. So there are impacts. There's also impacts within their supply chains in terms of productivity, etc. But a lot of these are embedded, and they're not completely current in, it's horizon scanning where you start thinking about these things. But businesses do act from a perspective of risks and opportunities. And so it's important when we're thinking about this to think, okay, from the business perspectives, what is important to them? And we've found with the Sahel and Great Green Wall, we brought out a report on restoration-based value chains where we were looking at the potential for value chains like baobab and moringa, and a lot of potential for them to tap into markets like natural care and superfoods. But there are challenges to be overcome, and we found it difficult then to bring in the businesses because basically the enabling environment needs to be there. And that makes it difficult when we're talking about these challenges, because where the support is needed most are also the areas where there's the greatest risks, and we have this sort of double-edged sword. So, but there are potential there's 3.6 trillion in business revenue that can be gained from business action in nature, and sort of 191 million jobs. So there are potential benefits to business, but it has to be seen from their perspective. When we think about then, so assuming that they should act, and many businesses do see that need, what should they be doing? And there's a lot that they should be doing, but what we try and take the perspective of from a responsibility and a compliance perspective, they should be considering they should be taking what we call an acted framework, which is assessing their work, where they can act, then committing to action, then transforming their approach with a disclosure at the end. So that's kind of looking at their processes. And we have a number of sector transition pathway reports that help different sectors such as mining, such as cement, etc., to consider where are the key areas for them to act. And they have a land component, which is useful. Of course, some sectors like agriculture and forestry, etc., have much more direct impacts, but many sectors, it's upstream in terms of resources that go into their products. So I think that this is very important, and then in terms of more of the sort of the corporate social responsibility, the other types of actions, what we see is businesses want to act on things that are relevant to them. So when it's restoration, the question, if you're trying to engage with the companies, the question is where are they based? Where are their employees? Where are their clients? Where are they sourcing from? And one example, we're in the process of launching a new Europe chapter for 1T.org, and we see a lot of interest from tech companies around investing in restoration for watersheds where data centers are based, because they see the risks around water. And so when we're engaging business, we have to think, how does it directly link to them, rather than seeing them as sort of having a responsibility and having money and therefore needing to act, but actually thinking of it from taking their perspective before we engage with them. And then sort of finally, just more on that line in terms of, how are they responding? What we see, and this is drawing lessons also from across the Climate Nature Center, we see that there's some companies that sort of are unaware of a problem. There are some who are sort of in denial and hoping they might not have to deal with it, and that's where a lot of the attention tends to go to trying to communicate to them to get them to act. But there's often a large number of companies that are acting or want to act, know they should act, but they have capacity challenges, and they don't know how to act, or they're looking to others in terms of acting. And then there's also the leaders that are acting, but then because they're going first, they're hitting the roadblocks and they're having to find solutions. And so when we think about companies that are acting, focusing on those ones and how to help them to achieve their objectives can be more impactful, and that requires innovation, that requires showcasing that. So it's sort of, how do you shift the perspective to getting private sector action that talks to the private sector? So yeah, really to conclude, there's a strong role for the private sector. They have impacts, they have actions to take, but in engaging with them, it's really important that we take their perspective as well, and that we look to innovation, because a lot of this action is new, and it's complex, it's costly, the data isn't always there. So there's a lot to be done, but it's great to talk to the first movers as part of our thing, not just talking to those that aren't yet aware. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tillem, highlighting the importance of involving the private sector, but doing it in a way that speaks to the private sector. And I think with highlighting innovation at the very end of your presentation, I think you've also again underscored the need for proactiveness in dealing with the theme of this year's World Environment Day as we lead up to Riyadh COP16, beyond making all these operational and operative linkages that land provides across the triple planetary crisis, across many other crises that humanity faces. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this celebration, I do hope that you've enjoyed the various presentation, that you've enjoyed this celebration of World Environment Day 2024, organized by the Geneva Environment Network. And again, a big thanks to Diana and the team. I want to thank Ambassador Al-Basrawi from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Ambassador Tony of Switzerland, all the member states representatives here in the room, the stakeholders that have joined us here in the room at the International Environment House in Geneva, but also all the people who have joined us online. Please do stay engaged with the theme of World Environment Day. World Environment Day, as we have highlighted, is only one day, but we need to keep the action going. We need to be part of generation restoration. So with this, thank you again very, very much, and I hope I see all of you very soon.